What is a marriage intensive? Where did they come from? How are they different from standard marriage therapy? Who should attend an intensive? If you've ever been curious about marriage intensives, thought you'd like to attend one, wondered if you and your spouse were the right fit, or wanted to know what happens during an intensive, then tune in to this episode. Dr. Heather Larson, the brand new Senior Director of WinShape Marriage, and his wife Heather have played a large part in the marriage intensive model and strongly believe in the value of this experience. They join me today to peel back the onion on marriage intensives so you can truly get a grasp for all this experience offers. Let's dive in. Peter, Heather, thank you guys so much for joining me on the WinShape Marriage Podcast this morning. I'm delighted to have you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're delighted to be here.
Yeah. So, Peter, you are the new Senior Director of WinShape Marriage, which is very exciting. And we're excited to have you on our team, excited for your debut on the WinShape Marriage Podcast and to hear from you. Would you mind sharing just a little bit about your background, kind of professionally, and what brought you to WinShape Marriage? And then would love to also open it for both of you to share just a little bit about your backgrounds personally and everything as well. So,
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been here about 3 months now, so very new to this role, but it's really fun to be here talking to you today, Marley. So my training is as a clinical psychologist, and I went to Fuller Seminary and studied both theology and psychology there. And was really fortunate to be invited to join a group of Christian therapists starting a clinic under Gary Smalley's ministry as I came right out of grad school. And Gary Smalley was a great speaker and author, internationally known at the time. And so I had a great first season of my career as a therapist, a marriage therapist, and working on that team. From there, I went to Prepare Enrich, which is really known as a premarital assessment tool. And we trained pastors and counselors to use Prepare as a discussion tool that would guide marriage preparation for couples. So I was with them for 10 years and had the honor of being president of that organization for a season. And then because of that assessment experience, I started to get pulled more into that world for a while. I was with an organization called Glue, and we worked with lots of technology, including assessment tools that supported churches and really the whole faith ecosystem. So I was with them for another 10 years. And then just, not too long ago, the Lord just prompted us to consider this move back directly into marriage ministry. And it's something that I told Heather, even as we were considering this, thinking back over all of my career, the years in marriage ministry, marriage therapy have been the richest. And I just felt like God was inviting us to return back to that. Cool. Meanwhile, Heather's had her own experiences along the way here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I was, when he was at Fuller, actually became attracted to the concept of marriage and family therapy, and started the program there with him as well. But then we were moving for postdocs and all of that. And so I finished my psychology degree as we were starting my master's in psychology at Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri, and where he was the counselor starting his marriage work. And we started a family. And as our youngest went off to kindergarten, I learned about coaching. And so I became a marriage coach and have been serving as a marriage coach with couples who come out of the marriage intensives for the last 13 years.
Wow. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So many cool threads just in y'all's history and background, personally and professionally. I know we had the Smalleys on the podcast earlier this season. And so I know that they're well connected with WinShape. I know that we've utilized Prepare and Enrich before. So it's just cool how the Lord weaves those things together. And how we're all kind of working in the same journey and in the same field, and delighted to have you guys now as a part of the WinShape Marriage journey. So,
Thanks.
So today, kind of you teased a little bit of it, which is great. We're going to be talking about marriage intensives and kind of unpacking these, kind of unearthing them. They can feel, for some, I think, a little bit out there, like, what is that? Who goes to those? Like, are we a good fit? Should we? Is that only for couples that are getting divorced? Like, what's the background behind these things called marriage intensives? And so I'm excited to kind of peel back some of the layers with you guys and ask you guys some questions and really hear from y'all about marriage intensives. So that's kind of the direction we're heading in this conversation today, if that's good for you guys.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So first, just right out the gate, kind of define our terms, set the stage. Want to ask you guys, what is a marriage intensive? Just like by definition, if you can provide one.
Well, it'll be fun to hear what Heather says too, but I would start by saying a marriage intensive is a really unique therapeutic experience, and it is a lifeline to so many couples who are either stuck or in crisis in their marriage. And it's different than standard counseling. It's kind of a unique thing. It's not standard counseling. It's not a workshop. It's not a retreat. It is an intensive 4-day therapeutic experience with a small group of couples and 2 therapists. And you are just diving in on what's going on in your marriage and where and how you're stuck and how you can move forward and just, be unleashed into something new in your marriage.
I think what also helps differentiate it from traditional counseling is it's in usually a unique setting where you're removed from sort of those everyday stresses and able to really focus fully on your marriage, kind of 8 hours a day, and working with those counselors in that group to really get unstuck and really experience some healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of double click a little bit into that difference between the intensive and traditional counseling, because I think traditional counseling is one that isn't so taboo isn't the right word, but people are just more familiar, I think, with the idea of counseling, especially in the current culture. Like mental health and counseling and therapy is a lot more talked about, and people are a lot more familiar with it. But want to kind of ask you guys again to help us break down the difference between the two. So I was hearing some of those themes, like intensive is a secluded experience. The environment's different. You're working, for many hours a day. There is a therapeutic aspect involved. It is therapy. So, just kind of break those down a little bit more for us, the difference, if you're okay.
A few thoughts on that. So I, for many years, was a licensed clinical psychologist and therapist. So I really respect that modality. Yeah. Typically, counseling or therapy, we use both phrases, is a 50-minute session for a couple to sit with a therapist and be working on their marriage. And couples come in for therapy for all sorts of reasons, and it is powerful and super helpful. It's not... it's not always exactly what a couple needs. However, if there's been a really difficult experience, and it might have been a betrayal, it might be they're just feeling so stuck. Sometimes couples are in crisis; they're thinking about divorce or separation, and an intensive can provide that sort of head start. It's kind of, I think we sometimes use the analogy of the ER. Yeah. When you have an emergency, a marriage emergency, you need the ER. You don't need just the outpatient quick little checkup.
Yeah.
And so that's, in my mind, really the difference. It helps couples probably cover what they would take them 6 months to a year to cover in regular counseling. And they can do that in 4 days.
Okay.
And I think too, like that traditional model, if you're meeting once a week for 50 minutes, you might be coming in the door and, who knows what happened as you were walking out the door or on the drive over. And you might spend 20 minutes just unpacking that and then have only a half hour left to really continue the work maybe that you started last week. And by having the intensive model, you're sort of removed from that space and you're really, like I said earlier, we're just really fully focused on your marriage during that time. And I think for couples to have that removal from, traffic and work and kids and those other responsibilities and just be focused on their marriage solely is such a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that analogy to be able to consider. I was even thinking of an analogy of like going to the ER versus physical therapy or something that you're, a weekly thing that you're doing or bi-weekly or monthly or whatever the case may be. And you're eventually going to get those results. But, if your bone is broken in two, like just going to physical therapy isn't going to heal that. You need some immediate care. And then maybe you actually follow that up with the physical therapy. So maybe in this case, and we might get into this in the conversation later, but you do the intensive and then you follow up with, care after the fact.
For sure.
But I did really like that analogy and just the idea of considering there's not many opportunities that you have to truly sequester yourself, as you were saying, Heather, of like sequester yourself in an environment free from those distractions. So I really think that those are some great differentiators. And so appreciate you guys like walking us through that. Definitely want to get more into the current, like intensive and who it's for and things like that. But before we jump forward a little bit, I actually want to jump backwards a little bit, if that's okay, and talk maybe about the history of the marriage intensive and like where it came from, how this whole thing got started. And so we were talking a little bit off camera before we started officially rolling, Peter, about some of your work with the history and the origin of the marriage intensive. So would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, we have to rewind about 25 or 26 years.
Okay.
And I was just finishing a postdoc at the Smalley Relationship Center and getting my license. And we had a team of counselors and therapists there who were working on specializing in marriage. And one of the things that had happened, I think for a long time, but we were now positioned to address it, was that Gary Smalley would go out and run a conference in a church somewhere in the country, and thousands of people would be there, and it would be a great event. But afterwards, couples would reach out to the Smalley organization and say, hey, we loved your book, we loved your seminar, but we need more help. Do you have anything for us? And, we were located in Branson, Missouri as a clinic and had a little outpatient counseling center. But that doesn't work if you live in Texas or California or New York.
Right.
And those couples were asking for help. So we started to really wrestle with what is a way that we could help these couples who are just really pleading for something to transform their relationship. Yeah. And what was really fortunate is one of our therapists had a background in individual intensives.
Okay.
He and his mother-in-law had actually run these group individuals, coming for like a week of intensive therapy.
Okay.
And they had been doing those in California. And he was talking about just how powerful that was for people. And we started to wonder, what would that be like if we brought a small group of couples together and had a couple of therapists facilitating that? And, at first we thought, will couples really want to sit in a small group? That feels really vulnerable to bring your stuff into a small group. But as we started to explore that and actually test some of that, it was actually one of the most powerful elements, because couples, they think they're all alone. They think they're the only ones who feel this way. And as they begin to share their stories in that group, and the therapists are unpacking what's going on, they see themselves in one another, and they realize, oh, we're not the only ones who feel this way. And then the other thing that happens really powerfully is you're not on the hot seat the whole time. There might be 30 or 45 minutes in a segment where the therapists are really working with one other couple on some stuff that's going on in their relationship, and as the observer of that, you're watching that, you're listening, your guard is down, you don't feel defensive because we're not talking to us right now, we're talking to them. Right. And it's a whole different way to absorb the insights, the learning, the content, when you're right there in the front row, but you're not on the hot seat, I say.
Yeah. And that makes me think about a difference in the counseling aspect, just your traditional counseling, where you're on the hot seat the whole time. You don't you're not sharing your counseling session with other couples. Again, nothing wrong with that. It definitely is a good model that works, but in this situation, that is a unique aspect of this that you're highlighting, which is very cool.
For sure. And really interesting things happen with that. I mean, I remember sitting in an intensive, one of the early ones, and God just brings people together sometimes for reasons that we could not orchestrate. But even in that day one, as people begin to check in and talk a little bit about their story and their background, in this group of 4 couples, one of the women shared how her father had abandoned them as a child. And the next woman shared how her father was an alcoholic. And a third talked about the abuse she experienced from her father. And I just remember hearing one of the women next to me say, I thought I was the only one who felt that way. Yeah. And, God brought them together for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. What was your role, Heather, as you were kind of either participating or observing, or just take me through a little bit of your thought process too, as you were watching Peter alongside some of these others kind of develop this new thing?
Yes, well, it's kind of fun. When we were at Fuller, he was in the PhD program, and I had just started the MFT program. God kind of gave us a vision of what would it look like someday to have a B&B, and it would be in this beautiful setting where, couples could come and have just an opportunity to get away from maybe their missionaries or pastors, or just get away from their life and be able to experience God in nature, and maybe have some individual counseling or group counseling, and provide hospitality and rest. And I feel like out of that dream, that the intensive program took that and multiplied that bigger and bigger. And here at WinShape, we look at just this beautiful setting where couples can come and experience God's peace and presence through nature, through hospitality, on a level that I couldn't imagine in our little vision that we had when we were just young marrieds. So it's fun to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When that model was created, you said earlier, like 25, 26 years ago. So what did it look like when it first was created and then kind of dispersed? And now that you are 2 decades post the origin of that, what has it kind of looked like over time, this intensive model?
Yeah, it really did evolve quite a bit in the first couple of years. We would meet every Friday as a therapeutic team and just brainstorm and unpack and whiteboard things on how can we make this a really consistent and powerful process. Because when we started, one of the lead therapists, the one who had the experience with these intensives, his name is Bob Paul. And Bob is a storyteller, and he's charismatic. And he kind of would break all the rules of regular counseling. Couples would be working on their marriage in this small group, and Bob would launch into a story and tell some experience that he had, and he would do a lot of talking, and I'd be like, why are you talking so much? This is their time. And then you'd look up, and couples would be in tears, like something transformational was happening because of these stories. And Bob was just so gifted. But as the rest of the therapeutic team, we would feel like, how can we do that? That feels like such a a unique individual gift. So we started to wrestle with that, and one of the things that God blessed us with early on was just starting to see patterns, and we called them, at the time we called it the fear cycle. And we started to see that in every marriage, couples have conflict, they have disagreements, and a lot of hurt. And that usually stems from some button getting pushed,
A fear.
And then we react. So if I have a fear of feeling inadequate, like I don't measure up, when my spouse says something that sort of triggers that button in me, it's not that they did it, that's my stuff, but it gets triggered in me, then we react. And we usually react in some way that tries to protect ourselves. And oftentimes the very reaction we do pushes our spouse's button. So Heather and I have our own pattern here. Why don't you help unpack that?
Well, when you're feeling maybe inadequate, like you were saying, how do you respond?
Yeah. So one of my protective measures is to typically withdraw. I shut down, I pull away. It kind of goes back to the fight or flight stuff that we learned in physiology. So that's a normal reaction when you don't feel safe. So I shut down.
So he withdraws and shuts down. And my fear is being unheard or unimportant. And so he's pulled away, and now I'm feeling unheard and unimportant. And so my response is to kind of get sort of angry or louder or try and be heard, which then
leaves me feeling sort of attacked and like I'm not measuring up and I'm not good enough. So so it creates this perfect self-sustaining cycle.
And I like to remind couples there's not a couple, whether they're coming to an intensive or not, that doesn't have this pattern that can be mapped out. And it's such an eye-opener when couples get a chance to see that and realize, oh, that's every argument, that's every disagreement we've had. It's been in that pattern. And to find that insight is such a gift. So that was in the origin of, you're going back to your question, the origin of the intensives, mapping that out was super powerful.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 groups that do intensives at WinShape. And everybody has one of these models. They might use slightly different language. Some call it the pain cycle, some call it the reactive cycle. But that language is really designed to help couples understand what's this negative pattern that we have fallen into. We brought our own junk into this marriage, and now it's playing out, right? And so how does that keep us feeling disconnected, unsafe in this marriage, and really stuck? And so, you had said this a second ago, Heather. It doesn't have to be a big issue. It can be any topic. It can be small things. I think you were telling me recently.
I had a couple that I walked through the reactive cycle through, and the topic that caused the spin, if you will, was yogurt. And so someone opened the refrigerator and they felt unloved because that was not their favorite brand, and the other person felt misunderstood. They were trying to honor the family budget and save 50 cents. And so when we unpacked it, we got to, it wasn't about yogurt, it was about feeling unloved and misunderstood. And it changed the dynamic. We didn't have to sit there and argue about yogurt.
Absolutely. It can be kind of a comedic relief when you think about how some of the littlest things can really trigger. I know that's kind of a popular word, but to what you were saying too, Peter, trigger that button in you. And obviously, if something as small and inadequate and insignificant as a can of yogurt or container of yogurt can trigger that, something large and massive certainly can be like a landmine for that as well. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
And I was just going to say too, going back to that question of what a couple's experience, how did those intensives take shape? that reactive cycle was the first big aha.
Okay.
And the second one was just how much safety, emotional safety, is important in a relationship. Because when we feel safe, we can show up as our full selves. We can just be open, and when that happens, couples can connect.
Yeah.
When we're closed off, protecting, guarding our hearts, you can't connect from behind a wall, and so couples end up feeling so disconnected. So, not only in the intensive do we help couples sort of unpack their cycle, we start to talk about what are the pathways to safety. What are the tools and insights that are going to get you back on track, feeling safe, feeling reconnected. And so there's a whole other set of insights and tools that quickly come on the tail end of the first day or two, where couples unpack their negative cycle, and then they begin to really work on the positive things, so that by the time they leave, they've got hope. They're starting to reconnect. And then they can go home and start working with their counselor or their coach to keep those things going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next obvious question I have as I'm sitting here listening to you guys unpack this, I'm hearing a lot about what they are, what happens in them, where they came from. And if I'm thinking about myself, if I'm listening to this episode, I might be thinking, okay, so am I the right person for this? Like, as an individual listening, or even a couple listening, they might be wanting to know next, like, well, then who are these for? Do I have to fit in some category to be able to attend an intensive? And so kind of walk us through what couples intensives serve. Like, what's the type of couple an intensive serves?
Yeah. It can be a couple who is married a short amount of time, or, I've had couples married over 50 years that are coming through. And what the common denominator is, these couples are feeling somewhat stuck in something. It might be that they've experienced something like a betrayal, whether it's intimacy or financial or some other kind of betrayal, some sort of deceit has taken place. For some, it's couples who just immediately find themselves in a really unsafe pattern. So they might be married even less than a year, but they recognize this is not sustainable. This is not what I thought marriage was going to feel like. Others are couples who might be coming in the empty nest years. So they focused on their marriage and then kids and career, and all of a sudden they find themselves really disconnected. They don't know each other anymore. They don't know how to find their way back to each other. Or again, like couples who are in an intense pattern of conflict at any point in their marriage and just feeling discouraged. And there's a lot of couples who will come saying, this was our last ditch effort. We wanted to check one more box, and they experience a miracle that puts them back on track. Yeah. And maybe you could talk about who it's not for.
Yeah. There sometimes you hear about the three A's. And so if there's an active addiction going on, if someone has struggling with substance abuse that has not been treated or started to mend, it's not the time for them to come to an intensive. Same thing with abuse. Many of the couples will say that our relationship used to be abusive, or there was verbal or physical abuse of some sort, but that has to have been acknowledged and beginning to be dealt with before they show up for the intensive. And the third would be with an affair. Many of the couples who come to intensives have been through some sort of infidelity experience in their marriage, but it doesn't work well to be at an intensive if that affair is still going on. We used to say, there can't be this silent third person in the relationship that's not there. So affairs, addiction, abuse, if those things are actively going on, that's not the time for the intensive. You need to deal with those things, but the intensive is a great way to begin to heal and rebuild after those things have started to be mitigated.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times people hear intensives and they think a crisis situation. So they think maybe one of those three things has taken place. And just to be clear, what I hear you saying, Peter, if those are currently going on, that would not be the time for the intensive. But if healing has occurred, or at least those have been dealt with, the affair is no longer happening, there is no longer abuse currently in the present, then going to an intensive could be a great starting point for healing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't just have to be in one of those three obvious, quote unquote, obvious crisis situations. You're also speaking to, Heather, it can just be a cycle of stuckness or a season of newness or discomfort or challenge, like empty nest, parenting, or a financial strain, something else as well. So there's all types of scenarios where a couple might be find that an intensive is a good fit.
Yes.
For them.
A lot of couples say, if only we had heard this content and knew this earlier in our marriage, and we may have avoided some of these. So I think it's something to explore if you feel like you're just stuck or you're not sure the pattern you're in isn't working. Check it out.
Yeah. I heard this analogy when I first started at WinShape, and I don't even know exactly the origin of the analogy, but I'd be curious if you guys agree with this analogy or think that it's a good one or not, or have a different one. So I heard that, if you get your car like regularly, like your oil changed regularly every 5,000 miles, or your tires rotated and balanced, or whatever the case may be, you do that, kind of very consistent maintenance on your car. That might be attending, as we offer at WinShape, and is offered in many other places, just a marriage retreat, a marriage experience, a weekend away, a conference, something like that.
An enrichment experience.
An enrichment, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Great word. And then I heard an intensive could be equated to maybe a larger thing that you do for your car, that you might not do, every 5,000 miles, but you might get like a new front end alignment or something that you might only do once in the life of a car, twice in the life of a car. I don't really know about cars, so don't come at me if that's not true car fact. But something like that could be, kind of equated to the intensive. Do you guys find that is an appropriate analogy?
I think so. It's funny you bring that up. I was actually thinking about that today as an analogy that, there's certain maintenance things we do, oil changes, maybe some brakes, but once in a while your car, it's like the transmission is shot. Yeah. And it's like, oh man, this thing's barely running, or, something major, timing belts, and like you said, alignment. Yeah. And you got to drop that car off for a week worth of work. It's not just in and out in 20 minutes. And I think that's a good analogy for an intensive. Okay. And so, like you said, it doesn't have to be, we're for sure headed for divorce here. But if a couple feels stuck, disconnected, and just wakes up and says, well, we need to change something, an intensive can be a great head start into rebuilding that marriage.
Yeah. Could it also be if there is a couple who maybe has been married 10 years or 12 years or something, and they've experienced, a lot of life together at that point, maybe they're not necessarily feeling that stuck, but maybe they just really do want some deeper work or deeper care, or maybe they were drawn to the aspect that you mentioned in the conversation earlier, Heather, of like the truly sequestered setting. Maybe they really are like, we could just benefit from deeper care 4 days away, to really dive in and take our marriage from a B+ or an A to an A+. Maybe they really necessarily wouldn't describe themselves as that stuck, but
Yep.
they just feel drawn to the type of experience.
Yep.
Also, could that be?
Absolutely.
Could there be a fit
I've
for
worked
them?
with couples who've come in that situation where
Okay.
we just know that we just want to have the best marriage we possibly can. And
Yeah.
we've heard this is a great program. We want to jump in. So their marriage isn't in crisis. They're not feeling terribly stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And they come and they're so grateful again, just because little things, like I said, like yogurt.
Yeah.
I've got these big feelings and
Yeah.
it's just yogurt. I shouldn't,
Yeah.
whatever. We can judge ourselves, all the things.
Yeah.
And so recognizing like, there's just a different way to do this. And there's more that I can learn and apply and grow in my marriage. So,
Yeah. Now back to the process itself, though. You're in the room with 4 other couples, or there's 4 couples total.
Yeah.
And so, is that does the responsibility fall on the people facilitating the intensive to make sure, like, would a couple in that scenario, find themselves in the room with a couple where an affair, a previous affair had occurred? Like, how does the group kind of scenario play out in that situation?
It is, it's just amazing how God will use those situations.
Okay.
Oftentimes, especially, the WinShape and the organizations who run these intensives are all faith-based groups. And so the couples who are drawn to these intensives are typically people of faith. And so they will find themselves praying even during the session quietly for the other couples.
Yeah.
There's also things that can be modeled. If a couple isn't as stuck as some of the others and they're learning maybe some of the new communication tools or ways to resolve conflict, that couple might be able to model something for the others that they're able to get there maybe a little quicker, but show them the way in a way. So, I've heard the therapists say it's actually hard if everybody in the room is in full-fledged crisis.
Okay.
If there's like 4 affair recoveries going on in the room at the same time, God will use it, but it's a tougher intensive than if you've got a little bit more of a range. And even still, a couple who would say they're being proactive like that, they still have their reactive cycle.
Totally.
They still have their stuff.
Yeah.
And so it may not have gotten as far down the road for them, but they're going to be able to still identify what's going on. And other couples, in some ways, that's comforting. Again, I'm not the only one who feels this way,
Yeah.
and I'm not alone in this.
Absolutely. What about a situation where one of the spouses is like not on board? Maybe, in some of these situations, there might be a couple that comes together and they're like, everything else has failed. We've tried everything. We are literally throwing one last dart at the wall to see if it will stick. And they've come to that decision together, and maybe they're on the same page about nothing else, but they're on the same page that they're going to give this one experience a chance. But I imagine there's probably someone listening that's like, I want to do this. Like, I've been begging my husband, or I've been begging my wife. I really think this is our chance. This is maybe our out or something. And the other party is not on board. Do you guys have any advice or encouragement or wisdom for a couple in that scenario?
The thing that comes to my mind is I know some groups will ask the question, do you believe that God can do a miracle? Do you believe he still does miracles? And that's the real question, because there are so many couples that come out and they say, we experienced the miracle. And so just to be open to the miracle, not to have belief in like, I'm going to be able to do this, or my spouse can do this, or my marriage can do this, or these counselors can do it, but that God can do it. Because that's really the goal of all these intensives, is really to help you become the man or woman that God has designed you to be, and then be able to enjoy the marriage that God has designed you to experience, right? So just having that openness and trust in God.
I think too, if you're on the front end of this and wanting to go to intensive and your spouse isn't, what's not effective is to talk about well, you need to change this, or you need to change that. This marriage stinks. To be able to talk about yourself, your desire, your heart in this, and really say something like, I am feeling prompted. I want to be connected with you. I want to experience the richest marriage we possibly can. And, I would love to invite you to join me for this. It's just 1 week. Let's give it a shot, But again, remove that you language or that confrontational tone and make it invitational and make it authentic. Yeah. And you, Heather, too, and you've seen hundreds of couples now in the aftercare coaching. And I know sometimes you talk about one of the markers is who's leaning in and who's leaning out.
Yes.
And so it's not uncommon for one spouse to be more engaged in this process than the other.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that as a coach?
Well, oftentimes they'll have arrived, like you said, into the marriage intensive. Maybe one is leaning out more than the other, or maybe they both kind of showed up like a little bit feeling like that last ditch effort. But one might still be somewhat leaning out. And I like to say I'm not in the job of convincing, right? I'm here to just help you see again what it is that God's already equipped you to have within you. And so it's really kind of setting that free in a person so that they can be open to experiencing what God has for them in that situation. Again, because I've worked with hundreds of couples through the years, I know that the tools and insights are effective. And yet, like if you're teaching one of your children to eat with a knife, spoon, and fork, you can't make them hold that spoon in their hand.
Yeah.
They have to choose to pick it up. They can go back to, I like to say, can keep having food fights, or we can learn how to, sort of pick that up and choose and do it differently. And so I think that it's just inviting people to come where they're at and see the opportunity and potential of picking up that new knife, spoon, and fork and see what happens.
The new tools.
The new tools.
Yeah.
Yep.
We've talked through what an intensive is. We've talked through what happens during an intensive. We went backwards to the origin. We talked about who might benefit from an intensive. And so I want to take us one step forward as we're getting toward the end of the conversation and ask, okay, so you have decided to jump in. You've chosen to attend an intensive with your spouse. You've gone through this week experience, this therapeutic experience. You've learned these tools, but it is a week, and then you go home. And then you have kids and family and in-laws and jobs and et cetera, et cetera. What happens? I know, Heather, you play a part in this after the fact. So you leave, and I think just an obvious question someone might have is, we did this thing, if we're going to do this thing, and we're going to, even put the financial investment into this, and we do this week thing, then what? Then what after?
Yeah. Well, a lot of these programs do have after-care counseling or coaching programs to help exactly with that. Like, how do we continue to, as Peter talked about at the beginning, create a safe environment for us here in our home, here in the real world with life and kids and job, to be able to start to learn how to pick up and apply the tools, the insights that they gain while they're in their marriage intensives. And so as a coach, I like to say I'm like a parent in the driveway when you're learning to ride a bike. And so you can circle back if you haven't gotten the bike out of the box. It's just sitting in the suitcase and you haven't started any of the tools here at home. I want to help you get started with that. If you've taken it out and you've tried a few rounds and you've got some skinned knees, let's learn from those mistakes. Learning to ride a bike, you're going to fall. And the falls aren't failure. You're not going to just be a walker just because you fell. You didn't tell your kids that when they learned to ride a bike. Instead, you said, let's look and see, you closed your eyes, you hit a tree, or, let's see where did we go off track here, and how can we get back on track here at home? And just encouraging that they're not alone in the journey when they get home. A little bit like the PT that you talked about too. It's really strengthening new muscles. We all have that pattern of the fear or the reactive cycle. And so that's easy. That's sort of second nature to self-protect when we're afraid and go back to our reactions. And so learning to do it differently in a healthy, safe way, that takes practice and kind of consistency. And so when you meet with your PT person, they're encouraging you to keep doing the exercises in between time.
Yeah.
That's what's building the muscles. That's what's getting you stronger and healthier.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the aftercare.
Yeah. And you're saying just real practically, real tangibly, the program that you attend your intensive through, they have the resourcing and everything for that. So
do believe-
that would be like the next step that they could follow up. If someone on their own wanted to follow up with a counselor, a therapist, you know, in their hometown or in their area, or someone that even maybe they were working with before and they, you know, went to the intensive, could that be
For sure.
a opportunity for some
sure.
aftercare as well?
Yeah, a lot of couples will have a counselor beforehand, and then they come to the intensive. There's many counselors or pastors who refer people for these.
Okay.
And then the intensive groups will work to close that gap. If they're going back to their counselor, there's often resources. Sometimes a couple will give permission for the intensive staff to talk with their counselor and sort of fill them in on any insights or suggestions. So it's kind of some continuity of care, we would say. I know if you, even as a coach, sometimes clients will ask you to talk to their counselor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. So WinShape Marriage as a ministry, I know we offer several different experiences as a WinShape Marriage ministry. And so we have these enrichment, you know, weekend and some midweek 2-day experiences, 2-3-day experiences that are really enrichment, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
And we have some different experiences designed for pastors and ministry leaders and people in the church. Where does WinShape connect with the marriage intensive model?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And we should actually talk about the really unique thing that WinShape adds to this.
Yeah.
So intensives, WinShape's not the only place in the country that does intensives.
Yeah.
It's one of the first to embrace this model and begin to run these. And first of all, like Heather said earlier, it's such a beautiful spot. It's on the back edge of the Barry campus. Barry College is the largest college campus in the country.
Yeah.
It's 27,000 acres.
Yeah.
And so there are just rolling hills and views and these beautiful old French country dairy barns that have been converted. And so you're in a setting like none other. And then WinShape really believes in grace-based hospitality, just going that extra mile. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet is every intensive group has what they call a host couple assigned to that group that WinShape provides. And so not only are people in a beautiful setting, great accommodations, wonderful food, but there is a host couple like waiting right outside the door to take care of whatever they need and to be praying for them, to have some downtime conversation, to encourage them in the downtime. And that is actually really one of the most special ingredients. Some couples will say, yeah, the therapeutic experience was great, but there was something that host couple said to us, even during a break, that really transformed the way I thought about something.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, you know, WinShape really is intentional about saying, how can we host these events in a way that really removes any obstacle for a couple, so that they can just rest in this experience and God can show up and do the transformation. Yeah.
And then real practically, just for any couple listening or watching, you know, if you go to OneShapeMarriage.org and you see the intensives, they are facilitated by external organizations.
They are.
But they are facilitated on the WinShape Retreat campus. And so if a couple has ever been or hasn't been, and that sounds very intriguing, the idea of this beautiful sequestered setting, and it really is so beautiful. That would be just the best place to kind of start unpacking that or figuring out if this might be a journey that they want to take.
Yeah, you're right. It's important to understand WinShape. We don't employ these therapists and counselors ourselves.
Yeah.
We're really the platform that they ride on top of. So that's different for our retreats and some of our discipleship training and pastor R&Rs and things like that. We do host those and our team runs those. But when it comes to the therapy stuff, we've decided to really let those experts be the experts, and we're going to set them up for success. It just so happens that Heather and I both have a lot of connections to these programs, having worked with them and helped start them in the past. So we've kind of got a special place in our hearts for the intensives as we look at the WinShape offerings.
Very cool. Well, even as someone who works for WinShape Marriage and who knew and knows about these existing, I've even just really thoroughly enjoyed being on the receiving end of this conversation too, and learning more and feeling well versed and equipped to be able to discuss more about what these are and who they can benefit and why they're so valuable. So I've really appreciated and enjoyed this conversation. Would love if you guys have a final thought or a takeaway for an individual or a couple listening, maybe someone who has gotten all the way to the end of this and is like, oh, I think I want to take that step, but I don't, maybe they still haven't quite been convinced, but would love to give each of you an opportunity if you have a final thought or takeaway to share as we wrap.
Yeah. Well, I think about you, Heather, as an aftercare coach who's worked with hundreds of couples. And there have been times where I've heard you look at a file or talk about this couple, is there any way they're going to make it? And yet God shows up and a miracle happens. And sometimes that miracle happens even after the intensive. They left and they were still in a tough spot. And it was a month later, it was 3 months later where this stuff finally found its way into their life and took hold and they just were transformed. And so I think the encouragement is don't give into hopelessness. God is not a God of hopelessness. He's a God of hope and new beginnings and healing. And this, your marriage really can experience those things.
God can redeem and restore all that is broken, whether that's a person or a marriage. His arm is not too short. So that's what I would want couples to hear, an individual to hear. It's not too far gone. God's always able.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Really excited for your new journey as the Senior Director of WinShape Marriage.
Thank you.
So welcome to our team. We're very excited to have you as well. Thank you guys for joining me today on the WinShape Marriage Podcast.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it was very fun. Thanks.
And thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the WinShape Marriage Podcast. And we will be back next week with a new episode. We hope that conversation blesses your marriage. If you're loving the WinShape Marriage Podcast, will you please take a moment to make sure you're subscribed? You may be a faithful listener and not realized you aren't subscribed. It really helps us out. Also, if you've enjoyed these conversations and they've impacted your marriage, please rate and review this podcast. One listener said, "Thanks so much for pouring into couples with godly wisdom and practical equipping."